Hi, this is Rebecca from Reading with Rebecca, and today I'm doing a video all about my favorite books from 2021. So these are the books that I read in the year 2021. They were not books solely published in 2021, and in fact, I don't think I have any books that I read last year that were actually published. Maybe I had actually one or two, but they didn't make it into my favorite book list. So originally I wanted this to be my top 10 favorite books, but I honestly couldn't find 10 that I would classify as my favorite. So instead I came up with nine different books that I really enjoyed last year, and so I want to share them with you in this video. So out of these 9, I decided to do the first 6 in just no particular order, just share these favorites that I read last year, and then the top 3 I will put in order of absolute favorite. To start off with, I will talk about this book, Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, written by the Scottish author Robert Louis Stevenson. I love anything written by Robert Louis Stevenson. He is one of my favorite authors of all time, and this story is just excellent. I think everyone's quite familiar with the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde. It's about a doctor who gets involved in some very dark science. So he is a man that is respected in society. He's liked, he's moral, he's a good man. This is Dr. Jekyll of the title. And then the science that he gets involved in makes him discover like a second person within himself, or there's a second person that comes out of him, and that would be Mr. Hyde. And he is like the evil, hideous, really no good, no conscience type of person. And so when this Dr. Jekyll gets involved with this kind of science and brings out this other side of him, of course, all sorts of problems ensue. And so this is just a really great gothic story, and yeah, it's not too scary, it's not too dark, it's not too it's not like gory or anything like that. So this is a book I would really recommend. Love the story, love the writing, just a really good read. Would recommend it. So the second book that I read last year that was a really good read for me was this classic, The Hunchback of Notre by Victor Hugo. This book was written in France in the year 1831, or I should say it was published in French in 1831, and then it was published in English 2 years later in 1833. Did I say when Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde was published? I didn't. That was in 1886. Okay, so back to The Hunchback of Notre Dame. So this is a classic tale. I think a lot of people know this story as well. It's about the hunchback named Quasimodo who lives in the Notre Dame Cathedral, and also is a story about Esmeralda, like a gypsy woman that lives in Paris at the time and dances on the streets, or how their lives intertwine, and about the heartache and sort of the tragedy that happens in their lives, and how their futures end up connected with one another. So this was a story that I've been totally intrigued by and wanted to read for the longest time. To be honest, Victor Hugo's books are all pretty large. This story was extremely large, and so I kind of avoided reading it for a long time, but I'm so glad that I ended up reading this in the end. Besides this main fictional story that's happening throughout the book, there's actually another part of this book that I found so intriguing and liked even more, and that was interspersed throughout this book are chapters which are all about the architecture in Paris, architecture like the Notre Dame, bridges, roads within Paris that Victor Hugo really admired and loved, and are basically heritage sites. And so he explains so much of the architecture in Paris, and it was a part of this book that just really made me fall in love with it. I remember reading somewhere that the motivation for this book, for writing this book for Victor Hugo, was due to the fact that all of this architecture in Paris was not being protected at the time. So I guess a lot of it was run down and neglected, dilapidated, and also there was a lot of like new art or new building structures going into old ones. So there was like a really eclectic kind of mess happening in some of these historical sites, which to Victor Hugo was really wrong and a huge tragedy. And he was trying to bring information to people, bearing on the fact that like these heritage sites should be protected. And so nowadays, of course, they are protected, but at the time they weren't. And so that was the goal of Victor Hugo. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book a lot. It wasn't my absolute favorite story, but like I said, those chapters interspersed throughout that talk about Paris and the architecture really kept my interest. And overall, I'm really glad that I read this, even though it's such a large book, at least for me. I got through it pretty quickly. So yeah, it was an enjoyable read. So the third book that I really loved this year, this I think could make it into my top 3, but it didn't. But honestly, it's that quality of a book. It's Charlotte's Web by the American writer E.B. White. This book was published in 1952. This was a book that I read in school, or at least it was read to me, and we discussed it in school when I was quite young. And I think probably a lot of school children have to read and discuss this book. It's honestly such a lovely tale for children or adults. The story focuses on this girl, a young girl named Fern, who lives on a farm, and she rescues a pig that's destined for slaughter because he's sickly, and so the pig is named Wilbur. We follow the pig around the farm. We kind of observe his life after being rescued on the farm, and we, get familiar with all of the other animals in the farmyard. But there's one animal that really stands out amongst all the animals, and that is the spider, Charlotte. So Charlotte is a really exceptional character in this story. Everyone really kind of adores her and loves her and goes to her for wisdom, especially Wilbur. And so this is a story that for me, really opened up my mind to liking and accepting spiders, all different kinds of animals. I remember as a child, I hated spiders and insects so much. And after reading this book as a child, I remember it was the first time when I kind of had that thought of oh, are insects not so bad, or are spiders not so bad? But then, of course, I went on hating spiders and killing spiders all the time. But now as an adult, after reading this book, I am determined not to kill another spider, because I just feel like I've really grown in my appreciation for all the various creatures, including spiders. This book, I find, is just a really kind of magical read. And by magical, I don't mean that it has magic in it, but I mean it's just so lovely and delightful and innocent, and it really makes you think about animals and relationships, and it's just a really tender read. So I would definitely highly recommend this book for a child or for an adult. I think it's just a really solid read. So book number 4 on this list is a contemporary novel called Convenience Store Woman. It's written by the Japanese author Sayaka Murata, and this book was published in 2016. This story is really fascinating to me. It's about a woman that graduates from school and gets a job in a convenience store. Now, in Asia, specifically in Japan, but also in other Asian countries, convenience stores play a really important role in the average person's daily life. Basically, everyone goes into a convenience store almost every single day. They buy food, they buy drink, they pay their bills there. It's just, you go in there for lunch. It's just like a really, kind of like a third place type of place. The main character of this book is a Miss Furukura, and she gets her job there. We see the convenience store through her eyes. She's very much a unique individual. When we get insight into her thinking, we can kind of tell that she's very unusual, but we learn why she likes working in the convenience store and what the convenience store means to her. One thing I personally liked was just the descriptions of the store. There was something about it, about the monotony of work that's done in a convenience store that was really appealing to me, and the way it was described really takes me back to being in convenience stores when I was in Asia, and there's just something about them that's very home-like and very welcoming. And so I found you really got the feel of an Asian convenience store with this book. Now, along with that kind of atmosphere that the book offers, I found that there are also like more important issues that are dealt with in this book. For example, the fact that this character works in the convenience store for many years, and is that okay? Like, for example, her family and friends start to view it as very strange that she stays working at a convenience store and never moves on and gets another job, never pursues a career, never gets married and settles down to have a family. So there's a lot of social questions raised in this book, like about what is acceptable behavior for us. I think depending on where you live, there's these certain cycles of life, like you go from childhood to adulthood, and you're in school, and then you get a job, and you should have a career, and you should have a family. All these social norms, I guess, or expectations that are put on us are dealt with this book. So I found it really interesting. I liked how it made you think, and I liked the character herself. It was an interesting character to read about, and it was a really interesting setting. This book is not too big at all, so it's a very easy read. I found it very enjoyable. I would recommend this book to anyone. So those were 4 books out of 9. The 5th book, I don't have the actual physical copy with me. I don't know where it went. It might be in storage. But that book is called The Secret Agent. It's written by a man named Joseph Conrad, who was a Polish man that moved to Britain. So he's Polish-British. The book that he wrote was written in 1907. It is a really fascinating short book about a man who is a spy living in Britain. So he's working for another country in Europe, and we sort of see this interesting life that a spy lives. Like, for example, if you ever wanted to know how a spy lives, it's like this book gives us a little insight on that. So just as you would expect, a spy doesn't really want to stand out. They don't want to be noticed, and so they have a very normal or kind of uneventful, unimportant life. And so we find our main character in this book is living just that. So he has a store, he's married to a woman, they have their daily routine, their daily way of life, and it doesn't seem really too significant. But then, of course, we get insight into the fact that this man has a double life, what he does as a spy, what are his sort of political motivations and goals. And then within the story, things start to change. Politically, there are political upheavals happening in Europe, and there are also changes happening within the British government, which all highly impact the spy and the work that he does. And so we see this spy's life being turned upside down, and then what he does to react to that and to adjust to that and to try to survive in this world that he's created for himself. So I found the story interesting, and more than that, I thought the writing was really strong. I actually was super impressed when I thought about the fact that this was a Polish man who had moved to Britain. English is not his first language, and here he's written this story and other stories. I mean, I haven't read any of his other stories, but just from reading this, I just can't help but be amazed at his ability to write a story like this in a language that isn't his mother tongue. So I found it really impressive. There were definitely parts in the book that lagged a little bit. There were parts where the language kind of went on and on, even though the language was so strong, but there were some parts that lagged. Again, this book was written over 100 years ago, published in 1907, so I don't know, like maybe that was probably more acceptable back then, and now we always want like a faster pace. But anyways, I thoroughly enjoyed the story. I think it's worth the lagging moments, definitely worth a read. So that was book number 5. For book number 6, it's actually a non-fiction book called Proactive Parenting. It's written by a British author, Mandy Saligari, I think is how you pronounce her last name. This book was published in 2019, and this author is actually a really well-known therapist. She shares a lot of information online related to mental health and specifically addiction. So this book, Proactive Parenting, is all about addiction. I was really interested in this topic because, addiction is really rampant in our society, and I really wanted to try to understand it better. And so I found this book helped me tremendously. It's a very well-researched, well thought out, big, informative book. There's a lot of information. It actually took me quite a while to get through it. Like, it took me a lot longer than I thought it would, but the information was really worth reading. It deals with things like, what are addictions? What are the various addictions that people have? Sometimes we just think of like a few, like drugs and alcohol, but this author really goes into the wide scope of all the various addictive behaviors that are out there. And then more importantly, she discusses why are people drawn, or why do people go into this kind of a lifestyle of addiction. And so I think the goal is to help people, and particularly help parents, to know what they can do to maybe prevent their children from heading towards these lifestyles of addiction. And a lot of it, according to this author, has to do with building self-esteem in children. So there's a lot of talk about, the needs that children have regarding self-esteem and things that parents can do to help fill this need. So I thought it was a really informative read, and I feel like it helped me to understand addictions a lot better. I loved that book. So that is book 6, and that brings me to the top 3 books of 2021 for me. And I am going to do these in order from least favorite to most favorite. So I am going to start off with this amazing book. This book is called The House on Mango Street. It's written by the Mexican-American author Sandra Cisneros, and this is just a total masterpiece. This book is all written from the point of view of a young girl who's living in the bad parts of Chicago with her family. They are an immigrant family, and the book starts off with her talking about how they've moved from different neighborhoods and different houses, and then finally they end up in one house on Mango Street. And it seems like they kind of put down roots there a little bit, and she's able to see her world from the viewpoint of this street, this neighborhood, and this house. So yeah, we get to learn a lot from the eyes of this child, when they're out on the streets playing. We learn like what the neighbors are doing, who the neighbors are, what kind of neighbors did they have in that neighborhood. And we also learn about her place basically in society, being raised by immigrant parents, and a lot focuses on the clash between the culture of her family, the culture and language of her family, and then the culture of the country that they're living in, which of course is America. So this book was written in 1983. I found that I really, really, truly appreciated the writing in this book. I think that this author is just an exceptional writer. For anyone who's interested in writing or likes to write or is aspiring to write, I think this book is a must read just to see her skill and talent. Like, it was truly wonderful, and I enjoyed this book 100%. Would highly recommend it. So that's The House on Mango Street. So my number 2 favorite book of 2021 is this classic novel by Daphne du Maurier. She's a British author, and the book is Rebecca. So this book was published in 1938. It's a thriller romance. This book was just so fun to read. It's quite a large book, at least for me, and yet it was so easy to read. Like, I just got through it so quickly, and when I was done, I was really sorry that I was finished. I think the most memorable thing about this book is just the atmosphere that is painted by this author. She is so great at setting a mood and taking you into this setting. So I should say what the story is about. It's called Rebecca, but actually the main character of this book is not Rebecca. It's another woman that has a change of circumstance. She goes from being single to married, and once she's married, she goes into this whole new world of life, living in the English countryside in this village in a beautiful manor called Manderley. So this house, Manderley, is a character itself in this book, like a major character in this book. It's a very, very important place, and the way this house is written just puts you right there. It's like you can see every detail of this grand house. You can see the dogs, you can hear the dogs, you can hear the ocean. They're right there on the beach, and it's just extremely atmospheric. So when this woman goes into her new life, being married to this man, there are secrets from his past that keep surfacing, and there's something about his former life that keeps haunting her, and it's related to this name, Rebecca. And so throughout this novel, you will discover who is Rebecca and what influence does she have on our protagonist. So this book, I think, for the scenes that it creates in your mind, for the way that it really pulls you right into the story and is so engaging, gets the second place for me. And then the very last book that I'd like to talk about, my very top book that I read for 2021, is this classic novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, by the female American author Harper Lee. Basically, this book is a masterpiece. It is perfection. This book is so well written, I honestly feel that there are no flaws in it. The story is about a young girl named Scout who's growing up in the American South. Do I have it here? Oh yeah, so this book was published in 1960. This little girl is growing up without a mother. She lives with her father and her brother. And in this story, all of the neighbors play a huge part in her life. Like she's observing them, she's learning about them, she's making guesses about them, and as children do, making stories up about her neighbors. So a lot of the story is just her and her brother, their imaginations, and what they get up to. As she's growing up, there's these bigger issues that are all around her that she starts to face. And so some of the issues have to do with racism. There are black people in this town and there are white people in this town, and the way they're viewed is totally different. And so she's learning, how should she view them? And thankfully, this little girl has a really good father named Atticus, who is a very good and moral man. And so he's trying to instill in her just those ideas of what is right and wrong and how she should view people. But of course, that idea was not very popular back then. So she's struggling with, having the proper view of race and of people in general. And along with the issue of racism, there's also other issues brought up, like people with disabilities or people who are different from others. And again, from a child's perspective, how are people that are different viewed? And then as she matures somewhat, how should those people be viewed? Are they friends or are they our enemies? So the issues that are raised in this book and discussed are very important, and I think really relevant for people anytime. But the way it's written is especially amazing. Like, this author just made a total masterpiece with this book, and I couldn't recommend it enough. So those are my top 9 reads from 2021. I hope you learned something, or I hope that maybe there was something in there that could interest you that you could take a look at. If there is anything that you've read recently from 2021 or 2022 that you would like to recommend, please let me know, because I'm always interested in good reading. So thanks so much for joining me, and I'll see you soon. Bye.